Every nurse fled at the sight of the Korean Mafia Boss hospital room. But the black nurse wasn't scared. She did this. Welcome back to Afro Drama Stories, where hidden identities are exposed, injustice meets its match, and every story ends with a lesson you won't forget. The clipboard hit the nurse station counter with a sharp crack that made 3 nurses jump. One of them, a young woman barely 2 years out of nursing school, stared at the assignment sheet like it was a death sentence. Her hands trembled as she pointed to a room number scrawled in red ink. 807. "I can't," she whispered. "I can't go back in there." The head nurse didn't argue. She'd already lost 2 nurses that week. One had quit mid-shift after delivering medication to room 807. Another had requested an immediate transfer to a different hospital entirely. The administration was running out of staff willing to work the 8th floor, and everyone knew why. Room 807 wasn't just any patient room. It was the one with armed men standing outside the door. The one where phones weren't allowed. The one where even doctors knocked twice and waited for permission before entering. The room where Cho Young-ho, one of Seoul's most feared underworld figures, lay recovering from injuries that no one dared ask about. The whispers had started the moment he'd been admitted 3 weeks ago. Nurses spoke in hushed tones about the cold way he looked at people, as if measuring their worth in seconds. About how he'd stared at one nurse until she dropped a tray of instruments and fled the room. About the guards who followed his orders with military precision, their faces blank, their presence suffocating. "Someone has to take it," the head nurse said, her voice tight with exhaustion. "We're short-staffed as it is." The nurses at the station exchanged glances. No one volunteered. No one moved. That's when Elena Thompson walked in. She moved through the fluorescent-lit corridor with the kind of steady calm that comes from years of seeing chaos and choosing not to flinch. Elena was 38, with dark skin that caught the harsh hospital lights, and eyes that had witnessed more than most people twice her age. She'd worked in emergency rooms in 3 different countries, had held the hands of dying patients, had talked down people in the grip of psychosis, had navigated war-zone field hospitals during a medical volunteer stint that had changed her forever. Fear, she'd learned long ago, was just another vital sign. You acknowledged it, monitored it, but you didn't let it dictate treatment. "I'll take it," she said simply, reaching for the clipboard. The head nurse blinked. "Elena, you don't have to." "I know." Elena scanned the medication schedule, her expression neutral. "But a patient is a patient. That's why I'm here." The younger nurse who'd thrown down the clipboard stared at Elena like she'd just volunteered to walk into fire. "You don't understand. That man. The things people say about him. I've heard the rumors," Elena replied calmly. She'd heard plenty. Cho Young-ho's name carried weight even among people who'd never set foot in Seoul's criminal underworld. She'd overheard doctors discussing him in careful, coded language. She'd seen the way security personnel stiffened when they passed his floor. But rumors, Elena knew, were often louder than truth. She gathered the medication tray and the updated chart, her movements efficient and practiced. As she turned toward the elevator, she caught the exchange of looks between the other nurses. Pity, maybe, or concern, or relief that someone else was shouldering the burden. The 8th floor was quieter than the others. The luxury wing of the hospital catered to patients who paid for privacy and discretion. But even here, room 807 stood out. Elena noticed it immediately as she stepped off the elevator. The 2 men in dark suits flanking the door, their postures rigid, their eyes tracking every movement in the hallway. One of them raised a hand as she approached. "Stop." Elena stopped, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I'm his nurse. Evening medication and vitals check." The guard studied her for a long moment, then lifted a radio to his mouth. He spoke in rapid Korean, too quick for Elena to catch more than a few words. There was a pause, then a crackling response. The guard lowered the radio and stepped aside. "Go in." Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Elena pushed open the door to room 807. The first thing she noticed was the silence. No television playing. No music. Just the steady beep of monitoring equipment and the soft hiss of climate control. The room was immaculate, expensive furnishings that didn't match the standard hospital aesthetic. Fresh flowers on the windowsill, white chrysanthemums that someone replaced daily. Heavy curtains partially drawn against the Seoul skyline. And in the bed, Cho Young-ho. He wasn't what she'd expected, though Elena had learned long ago that dangerous people rarely looked the part. He was 42 according to his chart, but he looked older in the way that stress and violence age a person from the inside out. His face was angular, weathered, with a scar that ran from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone. An old wound, long-healed. His eyes were dark and alert, tracking her every movement as she entered. He was awake, watching, waiting. Most nurses, Elena knew, would have apologized for the intrusion, would have bowed slightly, spoken in overly respectful tones, treated him like royalty or a loaded weapon. Instead, Elena set down the medication tray and reached for his chart, her voice professional and matter-of-fact. "Good evening, Mr. Cho. I'm Elena, your nurse for the night shift. I need to check your vitals and administer your 8 o'clock medications." Silence. He didn't respond, didn't acknowledge her words, just watched her with those cold, assessing eyes. Elena had encountered this before, the test of silence, the power play of making someone uncomfortable enough to fill the quiet with nervous chatter. She didn't bite. Instead, she approached the bed, wrapped the blood pressure cuff around his arm, and began the routine check with the same calm efficiency she'd use with any patient. His blood pressure was elevated, not dangerously so, but higher than it should be for someone who'd been on bed rest for 3 weeks. She noted it on the chart, then reached for the thermometer. "Open, please." For a moment, she thought he might refuse. The tension in the room stretched taut. Then, slowly, he opened his mouth. Elena placed the thermometer under his tongue and waited, counting seconds in her head. When she removed it and checked the reading, she frowned slightly. "You're running a low-grade fever. Have you been experiencing any discomfort? Any pain at the surgical site?" Still no response. Just that unwavering stare. Elena made another note on the chart, then reached for the medication tray. She held up each pill bottle, explaining clearly, "This is your antibiotic. This is for inflammation. This one is for pain management, though I see you've been refusing it." She poured the pills into a small cup and set them on the bedside table with a glass of water. "You should take all of them. Skipping doses can lead to complications." Cho Young-ho looked at the pills, then at her, then back at the pills. He made no move to take them. "You skipped your afternoon dose too," Elena continued, checking the chart again. "That's the 3rd time this week. If you're experiencing side effects, I can speak with your doctor about alternatives. But refusing medication entirely isn't going to help you heal." There was something almost imperceptible in his expression. A flicker of surprise, maybe, that she was speaking to him like a stubborn patient rather than a dangerous criminal. Elena had seen that look before on different faces in different circumstances. People who were used to fear often didn't know what to do with someone who refused to be afraid. She waited another moment, then shrugged slightly. "Your choice, Mr. Cho, but I'll be back in an hour to check on you, and those pills should be gone by then." She turned to leave, gathering her supplies. "Why?" His voice stopped her. It was rough and used, as if speaking required effort he rarely bothered to expend. Elena turned back. "Why what? Why aren't you scared?" The question hung in the air between them. Elena considered it, her head tilted slightly. She could have lied, could have claimed ignorance about who he was. But dishonesty, she'd learned, was just another form of fear. "I've been scared before," she said simply. "Real fear, the kind that makes your hands shake and your breath catch. I felt it in emergency rooms when we're losing a patient, in field hospitals when supplies run out, in moments when you know that what you do in the next 60 seconds will determine if someone lives or dies." She paused, meeting his gaze directly. "You're not scary, Mr. Cho. You're just a man in a hospital bed who needs medication." For a long moment he said nothing. Then, without breaking eye contact, he reached for the pills. One by one, he swallowed them, washing them down with water. Elena nodded once. "Good. I'll be back in an hour." She left the room, closing the door softly behind her. The guards watched her pass, their expressions unreadable. If you're enjoying this story so far, do us a favor, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Stories like this take time to craft, and your support helps us keep bringing them to you. Drop a comment if you've ever had to face your fears head on. We'd love to hear from you. The hour passed in a blur of other patients. Medication rounds, chart updates, a call light from room 802 where an elderly woman couldn't sleep. When Elena returned to room 807, she half expected resistance again. Instead, she found Cho Young-ho exactly as she'd left him, the empty pill cup on the bedside table. This became the pattern. Every night for the next week, Elena worked the 8th floor, and every night she entered room 807 without hesitation. Cho Young-ho tested her in small ways, accidentally knocking over water glasses, ignoring questions, sometimes pretending to be asleep when she entered. Each time, Elena responded with the same calm professionalism. She cleaned up spills without comment. She performed her duties whether he acknowledged her or not. She treated him exactly like what he was, a patient recovering from surgery. On the 8th night, something shifted. Elena was adjusting his 4-line, humming softly under her breath without realizing it. Just a melody from her childhood, something her grandmother used to sing while cooking. She didn't notice Cho Young-ho's reaction at first, the way his body went rigid, the way his breathing changed. "What is that?" She looked up, surprised. "I'm sorry. That song. What is it?" Elena paused, trying to place the melody she'd been humming. "I don't know the name. My grandmother used to sing it. Korean folk song, I think, but she never taught me the words. Just the tune." Something flickered across Cho Young-ho's face, an emotion Elena couldn't quite name. Pain, maybe, or recognition. His voice, when he spoke again, was quieter than she'd ever heard it. "My mother sang that song." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. Elena set down the 4-bag carefully, giving him space to continue if he wanted. When he didn't, she spoke gently. "It's a beautiful melody. She died when I was 9. Elena nodded slowly. She'd learned over the years that some confidences came unexpectedly, in the quiet spaces between medical procedures. That sometimes people said more to strangers than to anyone who knew them. "I'm sorry," she said simply. Cho Young-ho was quiet for a long moment. Then, "After she died, my father changed. Or maybe he was always that way, and she was the only thing that kept him human." He stared at the ceiling, his jaw tight. "I learned quickly that survival meant becoming harder than whatever wanted to break you." Elena absorbed this, understanding more in those few sentences than all the rumors had conveyed. She'd seen this before too. People shaped by violence they didn't choose, carrying wounds that never quite healed. "That must have been lonely," she said quietly. He turned his head to look at her, really look at her, for the first time. "Why aren't you afraid?" he asked again, but this time the question carried different weight. Elena considered her answer carefully. "Because fear doesn't help people heal, and everyone deserves the chance to heal." Something in his expression cracked, just slightly, just for a moment. Then the walls came back up, and he turned his face away. You should be afraid. You know what I am. I know what people say you are, Elena corrected. I know you've done things that have hurt people. I know your name carries power and fear. She paused, choosing her words with care. But I also know that you're a patient in my care. And that means I treat you with the same dignity I treat anyone else. That's not naivety, Mr. Cho. It's a choice. He was silent for a long time after that. Elena finished checking his vitals, made her notes, and prepared to leave. As she reached the door, his voice stopped her again. Elena! She turned. He was still looking away, but there was something different in the set of his shoulders. Thank you. 2 words. Simple, but weighted with something that felt like years of not saying them. Elena nodded. Rest well, Mr. Cho. The next morning, Elena learned the truth she'd been carefully avoiding. She was in the nurse's break room, drinking coffee and reviewing charts, when 2 of her colleagues sat down with expressions of concern and curiosity. You're still taking the 807 assignment, one of them said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Do you know who he really is? Elena set down her coffee. I know he's Cho Young-ho. I know people are afraid of him. The other nurse leaned forward, lowering her voice. 3 years ago, there was a territory dispute in Gangnam. Cho Young-ho's organization was involved. Buildings burned. People disappeared. The police couldn't touch him. Too many connections, too much power. She paused, making sure Elena understood. He's not just a criminal. He's someone who's destroyed lives. Elena felt the weight of those words settle in her chest. She'd suspected, of course. You didn't have armed guards and this level of fear without blood on your hands. But hearing it stated so plainly forced her to confront what she'd been compartmentalizing. Why are you telling me this? She asked quietly. Because you deserve to know what you're walking into every night. Because, the nurse hesitated. Because we care about you, Elena, and we don't understand why you keep going back. Elena was quiet for a long moment, staring at her coffee. She thought about the man in room 807. Not the reputation, not the rumors, but the actual person she'd been treating. The way he'd reacted to a simple melody. The loneliness buried under layers of practiced coldness. The quiet thank you that had cost him something to say. He's still a patient, she said finally, and I'm still a nurse. That's not enough reason to risk. It's the only reason that matters, Elena interrupted gently. I didn't become a nurse to only help people who deserve it by some moral standard. I became a nurse to help people who need healing. All of them, even the ones who've caused harm. Her colleagues exchanged glances, clearly unconvinced. But Elena had made her choice. That night and every night after, she returned to room 807. But now the weight was different. Now when she looked at Cho Young-ho, she saw not just a difficult patient, but a man whose decisions had shattered families, ended lives, perpetuated cycles of violence. It would have been easier, she thought, not to know. Ignorance had offered a kind of protection. Knowledge demanded something harder. A conscious choice to see him as human anyway. The moral tension ate at her. She found herself lying awake during the day, her sleep schedule inverted by night shifts, wrestling with questions that had no easy answers. Could you offer dignity to someone who'd stolen it from others? Could healing happen without accountability? Was her presence in that room an act of compassion or a form of complicity? She didn't have answers, but she kept showing up. 2 weeks after learning the truth, Elena arrived for her shift to find the 8th floor in unusual chaos. Doctors were conferring intense whispers. Security had doubled. The head nurse pulled Elena aside with an expression of deep concern. Mr. Cho is refusing treatment again. He won't take his medications, won't let anyone examine the surgical site, won't cooperate with physical therapy. His doctor is concerned about infection and muscle atrophy. She paused. He's asked for you specifically. Elena felt something tighten in her chest. Asked for me? He said he'll only accept care from you. No other nurses, no other staff. The head nurse shook her head. Elena, this puts you in an impossible position. We can't force you to be his exclusive caregiver. But if he continues refusing treatment, I'll talk to him, Elena said. She found him exactly as reported. Sitting up in bed, arms crossed, jaw set in stubborn defiance. 2 doctors stood near the door, looking helpless and frustrated. The guards outside had multiplied to 4, their presence oppressive. Elena dismissed the doctors with a polite nod and closed the door behind them. Then she turned to Cho Young-ho, her expression calm but firm. What are you doing? I don't want them touching me. They're doctors. It's their job. I don't care. Elena set down her bag and crossed her arms, mirroring his posture. You're being childish. His eyes flashed with something dangerous. In the hallway, she heard one of the guards shift position, alert to the change in tone. But Elena held her ground. Excuse me? You heard me. You're acting like a child throwing a tantrum because you didn't get what you want. She moved closer to the bed. You need medical care. You need physical therapy or your muscles will atrophy and you'll lose mobility. You need antibiotics or that surgical site will get infected. And you need to stop using fear as a shield against people who are trying to help you. The silence that followed was electric. Cho Young-ho stared at her, and Elena could see the calculation behind his eyes, the ingrained response of someone used to crushing opposition. But she also saw something else. Uncertainty. Why do you care? He asked finally, his voice low. Because it's my job to care. That's not an answer. Elena exhaled slowly. She pulled up a chair and sat down. Something no one else had dared to do in his presence. When she spoke, her voice was softer but no less direct. You want to know why I care? Because I've seen what happens when people give up on healing. I've watched patients deteriorate because they lost hope or refused help. I've held the hands of dying people who spent their whole lives pushing everyone away. And in the end, they all said the same thing, that they wished they'd let someone in sooner. She leaned forward slightly. You're not scary, Mr. Cho. You're not some untouchable force. You're just a man who never learned how to be alone without turning it into armor. The room was so quiet she could hear the ventilation system humming. Cho Young-ho's expression had gone carefully blank, but Elena could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands had unconsciously gripped the bedsheets. You don't know anything about me, he said, but there was no heat in it. I know you've spent your whole life making sure no one could hurt you. I know you've built walls so high that even kindness looks like weakness. Elena's voice remained gentle, relentless. I know that Melody made you think of your mother, and that thinking of her hurts, so you stopped letting yourself feel anything at all. I know you've convinced yourself that being feared is safer than being known. His jaw clenched. Stop. I know you're terrified of being vulnerable. I said stop. And I know that right now, in this moment, you're more afraid of me seeing who you really are than you've ever been of any enemy. The words hit like a physical blow. For a moment, Elena thought she'd pushed too far, that the walls would slam back into place and she'd lose whatever fragile connection they'd built. The guards outside would rush in. She'd be removed from his care. The distance would return. Instead, Cho Young-ho did something she'd never seen him do. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were bright with something that looked dangerously close to tears. I'm tired, he whispered. I'm so tired of being this. The confession hung in the air, raw and unexpected. Elena felt her own throat tighten with unexpected emotion. This was the crack she'd been waiting for. Not the moment when fear broke, but the moment when a human being acknowledged their own humanity. Then let us help you, she said softly. Not just with the medical stuff, with all of it. Let the doctors do their job. Let the physical therapist work with you. Let yourself heal. He was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. Then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. If the story is touching something in you, we'd love for you to subscribe to our channel. Hit that button below, turn on notifications, and join a community that believes in the power of human connection. And leave a comment. Have you ever had to choose between protecting yourself and letting someone in? Share your story with us. The next morning, Elena was called into the hospital administrator's office. She'd been expecting this, had prepared herself for consequences. But the conversation that followed still caught her off balance. Ms. Thompson, the administrator began, his expression carefully neutral. We've received concerning reports about your interactions with Mr. Cho. Elena kept her face composed. Concerning how? Multiple staff members have expressed worry about the nature of your relationship with this patient. The level of familiarity, the private conversations, the way he's become dependent on your presence. He shuffled papers on his desk. We have protocols about patient-nurse boundaries, particularly with high-risk individuals. I've maintained professional boundaries, Elena said calmly. I've provided medical care within the scope of my practice. You sat alone with him yesterday for over 30 minutes. You spoke to him in ways that made security personnel uncomfortable. You've become his exclusive caregiver at his insistence. The administrator leaned forward. Ms. Thompson, this man is dangerous. We cannot allow our staff to be placed in vulnerable positions. Elena felt anger flash through her, quick and hot. Every patient in this hospital is vulnerable. That's the nature of illness and injury. My job is to provide care, not to judge who deserves it. This isn't about judgment, isn't it? Elena interrupted. If Mr. Cho were a CEO or a politician, would we be having this conversation? Or is it only because of his reputation that my professionalism is being questioned? The administrator's expression hardened. Ms. Thompson, I'm trying to protect you. From what? A man who's learning to accept help? A patient who's finally engaging with his recovery. Elena stood, keeping her voice level despite the frustration building in her chest. I understand your concerns, but I won't abandon a patient who's made progress just because it makes other people uncomfortable. There was a long pause. Then, we're reassigning you to the 6th floor effective immediately. Another nurse will take over Mr. Cho's care. The words hit harder than Elena expected. She'd known this was coming, had tried to prepare herself. But the reality of it, being pulled away from a patient who'd finally started to trust, to open up, to heal, felt like a betrayal. You can't do this, she said quietly. We can and we have. The decision is final. Elena wanted to argue further, to fight the bureaucracy that valued liability over healing. But she'd been a nurse long enough to know how these battles ended. She nodded stiffly and left the office. Word spread quickly. By the time Elena arrived on the 8th floor to collect her things, the other nurses already knew. They offered sympathy and relief in equal measure. Sympathy for her, relief that they wouldn't be forced to take over the difficult assignment. Elena was gathering her personal items from the nurse station when one of the guards from room 807 approached. His expression was grim. He's asking for you. I'm not assigned to this floor anymore. He knows. He's asking anyway. Elena hesitated. Protocol said she should walk away, maintain the boundary that administration had imposed. But she thought of the conversation they'd had, of the vulnerability he'd shown, of the progress that could unravel in an instant if he felt abandoned. 5 minutes, she said. The guard nodded and escorted her to room 807. When she entered, Cho Young-ho was sitting up in bed, his expression carefully controlled but his eyes sharp with anger. They told you, she said. It wasn't a question. They made a mistake. They're protecting their staff. I don't blame them. I do. His voice was hard, the familiar coldness creeping back. Make them change their minds. Elena shook her head slowly. I can't. And even if I could, I wouldn't. This isn't about power or influence. It's about what's best for your recovery. You are what's best for my recovery. The statement, delivered with such absolute conviction, made something ache in Elena's chest. She moved closer to the bed, her voice gentle but firm. No, I'm not. I'm just one nurse who happened to not be afraid. But there are other good nurses here, other competent medical professionals who will take excellent care of you. She paused. The real question is whether you'll let them. Whether you'll take what you've learned about accepting help and apply it to someone new. He looked away, jaw clenched. It's not the same. I know. But growth never happens in comfort zones. Elena pulled up the chair one last time, sitting at eye level with him. You told me you were tired of being the person everyone fears. This is part of changing that. Learning to trust more than one person. Learning that vulnerability doesn't have to be dangerous. You're asking me to trust strangers. I'm asking you to trust yourself. To believe that the progress you've made isn't dependent on me being in the room. She reached out, stopping just short of touching his hand. You're stronger than you think, Mr. Cho. The fact that you let yourself be vulnerable with me proves that. Don't let fear pull you back now. He was quiet for a long time, and Elena could see the war playing out behind his eyes. The ingrained instinct to control, to dominate, to never show weakness, battling against the newer, more fragile desire to be different. Finally, he spoke. Will you visit? Elena considered this carefully. If administration allows it, and if it doesn't interfere with your care or recovery, then maybe. But you can't make your cooperation contingent on my presence. That's not healing, that's just a different kind of dependence. He nodded slowly, understanding the boundary even if he didn't like it. The new nurse will be professional and competent. Give them a chance. Elena stood, smoothing down her scrubs. And take your medications. All of them. On schedule. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Yes, ma'am. She was at the door when his voice stopped her one last time. Elena. She turned. No one has ever. He struggled with the words, his hands clenching and unclenching on the bedsheets. Thank you for seeing me. Not what I've done, not what people say. Just me. Elena felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but she kept her voice steady. Everyone deserves to be seen, Mr. Cho, even when they've spent their whole lives hiding. She left before the emotion could overwhelm her, closing the door softly behind her. The weeks that followed were difficult in ways Elena hadn't anticipated. She threw herself into her work on the 6th floor, caring for her new patients with the same dedication and professionalism. But part of her mind kept drifting to room 807, wondering how Cho Young-ho was doing, whether he was cooperating with his new care team, whether the progress they'd made would hold. She heard updates through the hospital grapevine. The new nurse assigned to him, a competent man in his 50s with decades of experience, reported that while Cho Young-ho was difficult at first, he was gradually accepting care. He took his medications. He worked with the physical therapist. He no longer used fear as a weapon against the medical staff. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. 3 weeks after her reassignment, Elena was asked to return to the 8th floor, not to room 807, but to cover a shift shortage. She accepted, knowing there was a chance she'd see him, uncertain whether that would be helpful or harmful. She was updating charts at the nurse station when she felt someone's presence. She looked up to find Cho Young-ho standing in the hallway, leaning slightly on a cane but upright, mobile, clearly much improved from the bedridden patient she'd left behind. Their eyes met across the corridor. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Cho Young-ho moved closer, his steps careful but steady. You look well, Elena said quietly. I'm being discharged tomorrow. That's good. It means you've healed. He nodded, but there was something in his expression, something unsettled. I wanted to speak with you before I left. The administration approved a brief conversation. They found an empty consultation room, the door propped open per protocol, a security guard visible in the hallway. Cho Young-ho sat down carefully, and Elena took the chair across from him. I've made decisions, he began, his voice low, about my life, my organization. He paused, choosing words with obvious care. I'm stepping back. Not immediately, that would cause chaos, but gradually, transferring power, restructuring things so they're less destructive. Elena absorbed this, surprised but trying not to show it. That's a significant change. You were right. I was tired of being what everyone expected me to be. Tired of the violence, the fear, the emptiness of it all. He looked at his hands. I don't know if I can undo the harm I've caused. I don't know if there's redemption for someone like me, but I can stop causing new harm. I can choose to be different going forward. That's all any of us can do, Elena said softly. We can't change the past. We can only choose who we want to be in the present. He met her eyes. I wouldn't have made this choice without you showing me that being seen, really seen, doesn't have to be dangerous. Elena felt the weight of his words, the responsibility they carried. She'd entered his room weeks ago with no agenda beyond providing medical care. She'd never intended to change anyone's life, to shift the trajectory of someone whose decisions affected hundreds of people. And yet somehow, through nothing more than consistent presence and refusal to be afraid, something had shifted. Mr. Cho, she said carefully, I'm glad you're making changes. I'm glad you're choosing healing over harm. But you need to understand something. This choice has to come from you, not from me. It has to be rooted in your own values, your own desire to be different. Because I won't always be here to remind you. I know. He leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked almost peaceful. But sometimes all we need is one person to show us it's possible, to not flinch when they look at us, to treat us like we're human even when we've forgotten how to be. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken understanding between them. What will you do? Elena asked. After you leave? Rest, recover, start making changes slowly. He paused. And maybe learn to sing that song my mother used to sing. I realized I'd forgotten the words. Elena smiled. That sounds like a good place to start. When they parted, there was no dramatic goodbye, no promises to stay in touch. Just a quiet acknowledgement that they'd each given the other something valuable. Cho Young-ho, a reminder of why Elena had become a nurse in the first place. Elena, a glimpse of who Cho Young-ho could become if he chose differently. Elena watched him leave the hospital the next day from a window overlooking the main entrance. He moved slowly, still healing, but under his own power. The guards surrounded him, the usual entourage. But something about his posture seemed different, less rigid, less defended. She didn't know if the changes would last. Didn't know if he'd follow through on his promises or if the weight of his past would pull him back. But she'd learned over the years that healing wasn't about guarantees. It was about moments of choice, small decisions that accumulated into transformation. Months passed. Elena continued her work, rotating through different floors, caring for different patients. She didn't hear anything more about Cho Young-ho directly, but occasionally news filtered through, reports of his organization becoming less violent, of disputes being settled through negotiation rather than force, of a gradual shift in how they operated. She couldn't know how much of that was his doing, how much was genuine change versus strategic repositioning. But she chose to believe that somewhere in those shifts was the echo of a man who decided to be more than his worst actions. One evening, 6 months after Cho Young-ho's discharge, Elena received a package at the hospital. No return address, no note. Just a small wooden music box, intricately carved. When she opened it, the mechanism played a familiar melody, the folk song her grandmother used to hum, the one that had triggered a memory and started a conversation. She stood in the break room, listening to the simple tune, and allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Not because she'd saved anyone or fixed anything, but because she'd shown up, consistently and without fear, and that had mattered. If you've made it this far, thank you for being here. Stories like Elena's remind us that courage isn't always loud, and change doesn't always happen dramatically. Sometimes it happens in hospital rooms, in quiet conversations, in the simple act of treating someone with dignity when everyone else has given up. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to this channel, hit that like button, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And in the comments, tell us, have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between fear and compassion? We'd love to hear your story. Until next time, remember, the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to look away from someone's humanity, even when it's difficult. Especially when it's difficult. The music box continued to play, and Elena let herself remember. Not just the fear that had filled room 807, but the quiet transformation that happened when one person chose to stay.